Hi, Mudit. Good evening. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well, Ari. To be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very nice to have you here. So,
Yeah.
we recently started the sessions with alums from the business schools, where because at the end of the day, people want to hear it from the horse's mouth, right? So, and like not everyone can talk about the specific experiences of it, of the particular school that some alum has gone to. And INSEAD is a school where a lot of Indians and across the globe people want to apply to, but there are a lot of myths, and I would say there are a lot of concerns around people applying to INSEAD. So the idea here is to bring somebody who's an INSEAD alum, so that you can share your experiences and of course unravel some of their myths, right? And
Absolutely.
give a practical experience, practical insights into how should people apply for an INSEAD application, right? And
Absolutely.
this will limit this to INSEAD general MBA program, then not the Gemba, not the global executive MBA program, but the normal flagship program, right?
Perfect.
So yeah, for starters, it'll be great, Mudit, if you can give a quick background about what you're doing, what did you do before INSEAD, what you're
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
after INSEAD, and then we can take it from there.
Yes. So I'll keep it very, very brief, but like did my engineering from India, got into consulting right away. Knew ki engineering wasn't necessarily the field for me, and honestly, it's the way Indian colleges teach it. But it can be a very exciting field, but it wasn't very exciting. So got into consulting. Did consulting for about 6 years at ZS. That was more data analytics, very niche, focused on pharmaceutical. Knew I didn't want to be in pharma. It wasn't very exciting, even though I was doing some new product launches over there. It wasn't the most exciting thing. But I also knew that I wanted to have some sort of global business exposure. And even if it's not through the MBA, I knew my career was going to be global in terms of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. That was a very general sense I had. And I went to INSEAD luckily because my brother-in-law was from INSEAD. So while he was there, I'd visited INSEAD, and just the class environment and all, it really made sense to me. So that was the only school I applied to.
Oh,
And
okay.
post INSEAD,
That's very brave. That's very brave of you. Here, I'm sure
I
people
don't know if
who.
it's brave or if it was just like I was in the US while I was applying for business schools. And like GSB, Stanford is amazing. MIT, Sloan had some very interesting things, but the 2 year program didn't make too much sense to me. And also, like the US education system is relatively different than the global education system. And when I say global, maybe the European one. And I naturally gravitated towards a little more multicultural one, which was at INSEAD. And IMD was the only other international B school at that point that I would have considered probably, but IMD was too, like for people 37, 38 years old or 30 plus people would be applying there, much more experienced, right? They knew what they were looking to do. So INSEAD fit the bill, and had a brilliant experience there. Didn't sit for recruiting, and like while I was heading out of the US, doston ne like had always told me, yo, like I'd been speaking to multiple people who had different career trajectories, and I was trying to figure out, okay, which one resonates with me. And product management at that point, it wasn't as hot it was as it is today, and much more difficult to get into back then. But product management is what really excited me. So that was the kind of opportunity I was looking for afterwards. And I didn't sit for recruitment. Went back to the US, spent 6 months in San Francisco just trying to hunt around, and like I think through that process ended up in the Amazon product program. And honestly, one of the best things that I've done, even though my experience at Amazon was relatively short. It gave me the product management basics, and then that continued forward. So product management and e-commerce is what I've been doing since then. Left Amazon, went to another marketplace, moved to India about 2-3 years ago, and now I'm launching a SaaS business within e-commerce as a product management manager as well. So the trend has continued post INSEAD.
Great, great. So all I think before, after I hear a lot of excitement, a lot of it's not. I'll not say it's a traditional career trajectory post INSEAD. It was you took your own risks and figured out stuff which you wanted to, not necessarily what the path the others were following, right? So now, so this one interesting thing you observed is you talked about global. You mentioned the word global multiple times in this short span of time, right?
Yeah.
And INSEAD is one of the most global schools. That's how they position, and that's how people are, right? It has representation in more than 70 countries and all of that, like people across different nationalities and all of that. So how important is having an international work experience before applying to INSEAD? I know you mentioned that you had stints in US before going to INSEAD, but for someone who's probably not got that experience to work outside their home country, and whichever that country is, right? People across the globe are watching this video, so whichever country they have been localized in their experience. So how important is the international work experience in an INSEAD application?
So I think if you take a step back, in my this is not from I have never sat at the committee which decides this, but just looking at my peer group before and since INSEAD, I think you need some sort of X factor. Now that X factor can be your international experience. It can be something else that you bring to the table, like you're a doctor and you've been running your clinic in rural India, and now you want to go and like figure out how to launch this in Africa, and you think INSEAD is the great place to go. So that's your X factor. So I think it's less about international experience, it's more about the X factor. And honestly, like every business school is a business also. Business schools are a business as well. So
yeah, of course,
will only succeed if you are employable at the end of that business school program, right? You're earning 2x the salary that you were earlier. So I think those are the only two things that I think really matter, not necessarily specifically international experience. Having said that, it was good to have the international experience because I think I enjoyed the program much more. I knew going in that you can be very India centric as well, like in terms of the peer group that you form, that you specifically socialize with, to the kind of projects that you do. I think having an international experience helped me take the most out of INSEAD for sure. I think that experience was helpful in that, but not necessarily. I don't think it was a necessary condition to get into INSEAD.
Okay, so just to have like a tangible angle to this entire conversation. So did you actually have people in your classroom who had experiences before joining INSEAD only in their home countries?
Yeah, we did. Absolutely. Like a bunch of people. In fact, a lot of Indians did, but those Indians weren't like those Indian, my fellow mates weren't the regular run of the mill kind of people, right? Like even if they had a regular run of the mill job, they weren't, in their experiences and in their interests, they weren't regular run of the mill people. And I'll give you two examples. One was somebody who was one of the early members of a winery in India. Now that person's experience was only in India, but winery experience, like to think about running an alcohol brand in India is amazing, right? Like that's just a very different experience. So that's one example of it. The other example would be somebody who was working with BMTC, the Bangalore
Municipal Transportation.
Yeah, the transportation company, trying to help them improve, right? As a social consultant. So again, a very different view of the world compared to having professional experience all over the globe. So they had X factors, and it was amazing. Both of them that I'm mentioning were really unique people, and I learned a lot from them. Give me 1 second.
Sure, absolutely.
Good to go.
Great. So next, Mudit, you talked about, so a lot of people ask me, like when I help applicants with profile evaluation and of course their journeys. So a lot of people ask me that while I have not I've not gone outside India to work there in a full-time capacity. However, all my experience has been with people who are global. Like for example, in consulting, right? As you mentioned, ZS. At ZS also, most of our clients, and when I say us, because we work together at ZS as well. So almost all our clients were based outside India, right? So our counterparts are outside India, our international outside India. I used to go to outside India, like for US for meetings and stuff. You permanently relocated to India outside. But there are people who did not get the opportunity to relocate or go for short stints, but they worked with these people for be it Germany, US, wherever, Australia. Does that also count as international experience, or is it only if you have a stamp in your passport?
No, I don't think even the stamp matters. I think honestly, see, what are they looking for when they say international experience? They're looking like international experience. What does it mean? It means that you understand how global trade happens in certain domains in certain areas. So it doesn't even mean that you have a stamp in your passport. It doesn't even mean that you have moved abroad. It's just your ability to empathize and understand what the business cycle looks like in some other geography, and your ability to understand, okay, India mein, this is how it happens, and outside India, this is how it happens, and you're able to operate in both those environments, right? That's essentially what guarantees success, because again, your employability will depend on that. Either you're in Singapore or you're in France. You are recruiting either with primarily European companies or with Southeast Asian companies. Of course, India is a big recruitment center for INSEAD now, especially with the tech salaries being what they are. But Southeast Asia, Asia, the broad market, and Europe, the whole of Europe, right, including London, including all of these amazing places, especially as an Indian or as a non-EU or a non-Southeast Asian resident, those are the two primary geographies that are recruiting. So I think what they are looking for is a signal to them that you will be able to operate in that environment. Of course, it's not saying that you will be able to operate on day one. They'll help you, coach you in how to interview and stuff like that, how to interact with your colleagues who are from there. You'll get a lot of coaching there, but they just want to see some signal of your ability to operate in different environments. And I'll come back to the people who are working in BMTC, right? Like that person didn't necessarily have an international experience from a work experience perspective, but they had done work with very different business environments, and they were able to put that thought forward that, hey, I can operate in multiple different business environments, and I am flexible and I can adjust to those places. So I'm just giving you one example of a story that made sense to say, hey, yes, this person has managed very adverse situations with very different and varying group of business folks, and he's able to operate, or she's able to operate in that environment. So that person is likely to be a better fit for INSEAD.
Understood. Fair enough. Yeah, that makes sense. So now, so when again they're coming back to the topic of diversity and the international experience. So since INSEAD boasts of having that heterogeneous crowd, right? Heterogeneous cohort. So is there like for every class, is there like a fixed percentage of that class which is only allocated to Indian students?
Yep, there is. I forget what the percentage is. It's either 10 or 20% of the class of the entire batch is from one country, because we have a lot of people who are British as well, a lot of people who are French as well, a lot of Dutch people as well. So each of these cohorts is limited by a certain percentage of the overall batch, for sure. There is a upper limit. I forget what the number is. It's either 10 or 20%.
Makes sense. And a person who has a green card from US green card holder, is he considered part of the US pool, or is he considered part of the Indian pool?
So I was in that category when I went, and I was an Indian. It depends on your passport.
It depends on your passport. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so now a lot of people also have said that going and tying this with the recruitment employability perspective, right? So A is you, of course, have interact with people from different geographies and can appreciate and acknowledge others' point of views as well, which is important if you take up a leadership role. How important is the knowledge of French? Like I'm just only saying French because from the Fontainebleau campus, not from Singapore campus. Singapore campus might have their other language specific requirements, but I guess that's not that much there in Singapore. But in terms of European recruitment from the Fontainebleau campus, how important is your knowledge of French before you join the program? Is that a criteria they look for in applicants?
Not at all. French specifically, no. INSEAD is very clear. You need to be able to speak 2 languages before you enter INSEAD, and you need to be able to pass A2 grade third language by the time you graduate INSEAD. So the languages can be any. It does not matter. So that's from the coming in perspective. I'll talk about the recruitment side as well. But coming in, you just need to have two languages that they recognize are two distinct languages coming in, and a third language you have to pass the A2 grade by the time you graduate. So languages could be, if I remember correctly, it could even be Hindi and Malay, for example, or Hindi and Bengali, if I remember correctly. I'm not 100% sure, but there were a few Indian languages that if you spoke those two languages, like between Hindi and English, I was very much settled on the incoming requirement. And then for the outbound, I had Bahasa Indonesia for different reasons, but that's my third outbound language. So I went to Fontainebleau campus as well for a couple of periods. So French wasn't a necessity. But though, having said that, if you are going to Fontainebleau campus, I would highly encourage you to learn French while you're there, because it's just so much more fun to live in France if you know French. If you don't know French, half the experiences that you have in France, you miss it, right? Because you don't know where to go, blah, blah, blah. Now let's talk about the recruitment side. Recruitment, INSEAD puts no condition on this. This is all the market expectations. If you're going to get recruited into any of the European nations in a more traditional industry or in a more traditional BD and a sales role, well, you need to interact with the local population. And this includes, by the way, consulting firms.
Consulting as well, yes, of course.
Right? Because they're dealing with more traditional businesses. You need to know business grade local languages. You can't know A2 grade. It's like, this is, I think, C2 or D2 grade local languages to be able to even think about joining those organizations in those geographies. But now, again, with tech, Berlin, Munich, Amsterdam, even Paris to some extent, are massive tech recruitment hubs today. So over there, if you're going for a tech-based role or a more new age-based role, all to Amazon in Luxembourg, for example, there's no requirement. All you need to know is English.
And fair.
And so, like, INSEAD puts no criteria on the outbound side. It just puts a criteria on you to be able to come in and graduate. And those are very low barred, especially for multilingual folks like us.
Got it. And for INSEAD, I mean, I think this is true for every business school, that they would want the people to get employed, right? That placement, as you mentioned, placement risk is very important. So how different can your past be from your future? Like, for example, somebody working in IT, right, who's been a hardcore developer, right? And of course, we've all interacted with developers, and they're one of the sharpest minds in the country and across the globe, right? But the person is a hardcore developer, and now tomorrow he says, I want to get into investment banking. Right. So the reason, he might have his own reasons, right? But how, from an admission committee perspective, how do they look at this transition from, especially because INSEAD is a 1-year program and not the traditional 2-year programs where you get time to intern and then do some more trainings and live workshops with organizations. Here it's the 1-year program without internship. So how does the application, the admission committee look at such kind of a transition in terms of feasibility?
Honestly, when I wrote my essays, I wrote it in a continuation of what I was doing. Hey, I'm coming from pharma and I want to do pharma, and health tech was something I was constantly thinking about at that point. At least that made sense to me at some level because I was coming from healthcare. But again, I think it's about storytelling, man. It's about like, hey, I was doing this and this is what I want to do, and here's how I want to bridge the two through INSEAD. If you can answer those questions through your essays, I think everybody's okay with you changing your answer on what you want to do. Everybody knows that you are going to do it. The fact that you are going to INSEAD or any top business school is because you do want to expose yourself to multiple things and then sort of figure out what excites you, right? So everybody's okay with you changing your mind. But I think what I would suggest, and again, I've never sat on a committee which selects candidates to come in, but this is my assumption and this is my extrapolation from talking to multiple people, that it all depends on how good a story you tell, right? To go from X to Y, and why does that bridge need to be INSEAD, or what does INSEAD offer to be able to get you from one place to the other place? And I think there's great ways of spinning the story, and I would genuinely encourage anybody who's applying to, especially a 1-year program, to actually take this question half seriously, not just for the admissions committee, but also for themselves, because it is a 1-year program. And I was talking about coming into INSEAD now. Let me talk about what happens at INSEAD.
Sure.
INSEAD is a 10-month program. Even if you go for the January to December, that's 12 months, but the 2 months is a break in the middle. So it's a 10-month education academic program divided into 5 periods. Your first 2 periods, you're together with your core batch, you're doing all the classes together. It's the time where you sort of are getting to know people and you're having fun, and it's a new place, new environment. And that goes by very, very quickly. Then you get to third period, and then some people are starting to get anxious about jobs and stuff like that coming up. So then the influences really start, like the heavy influences of, oh, everybody's doing consulting, oh, everybody's going after these finance jobs. So that's where the pressure comes in, right? So, and then the pressure really accelerates in the fourth period, which is when recruitment actually happens, where companies come into this is like, you've spent 6 months of academic career. Now it's your 7th and 8th month within INSEAD is when recruitment is happening. And most people, 80% of your batch is going to get recruited in that period. And then you have month 9 and 10, that if you haven't recruited by then, it's very heavy pressure period, right? So you genuinely only have like that P3 period, which is month 5 and 6, to really take a breath and really enjoy the classes that you're having and really sort of formulate where you're going. So I'm not saying you won't be able to change your mind. You definitely can change your mind, but having a perspective, even if it turns 180 degrees later, is going to be hugely beneficial when it comes to recruitment, because recruitment will require a little bit of focus to say, okay, this is what I want. This is the general area that I want to target. So you'll have to network. You'll have to spend the time learning about that industry. If you're not from that industry, you'll have to talk to multiple alums to be able to figure out, okay, where do they have jobs? Do they have jobs? A lot of that work that effort takes up time. And for that, you need to have some sense of why you are there, right? So that's why I would say, for the admissions committee, it's important that you have a good story, but for you to succeed through INSEAD, INSEAD is not the end goal. The end goal is to power yourself up, to level yourself up in terms of your career. So if from that perspective, I would highly recommend people to just genuinely think about it. And I think, Arijit, you and I have had some conversations around this. I think you are a great person to bring about like conversations with people like you. I think I would highly recommend, because you see patterns and you're able to suggest to people, okay, here's a pattern I'm seeing. Is this something of your interest? It might not be specific, but you're able to identify patterns through their journeys, especially given how many people you've spoken to, right? So those patterns become easier for you to identify. So I think people who are applying should take that benefit of that application process, including conversations with you, including conversations with their previous bosses, with their previous colleagues and stuff like that, to sort of identify certain patterns for them, which will be helpful for them during the recruitment process within INSEAD as well.
No, absolutely. And again, like a lot of times when we're working independently, like working on our own, we get into our own silos, right? So that way we are not able to see a bigger picture, macro perspective a lot of times. We might just be unidimensional. You need to have that multi-dimension aspect about you. But good that you brought up the idea of applications.
I'll just add one thing. I think this is from my own application process. I had done a bunch of volunteering work with like different hiking organizations. While I was in India, I did a small project with a solar powered light, a startup that was trying to sell to rural India and stuff like that. So I never thought much about that while applying to INSEAD. I was like, don't have much of an experience. But when I spoke to people, they were like, oh wow, this is a very clear, interesting pattern that you have, and these are the points that you should highlight so that they come across to whoever is listening. So again, as you're saying, because you know yourself so well, and because people have a tendency of being really harsh on themselves, we sometimes forget some of our highlights in our life, right? Or some things that we should polish as part of storytelling. So it's always good to have a conversation with definitely an expert if possible, but with your friends and family about, hey, what do they think about you? So anyway, sorry, I just wanted to add that.
No, no, absolutely. That's a very fair point. And again, it's important. It's critical that you also highlight the same points because you've done this process, right? Been there, done that journey. Now coming to applications, right? So INSEAD is you would not know because you applied to only one program,
Yeah.
but your friends would tell you that INSEAD has the most exhaustive application across the entire MBA program, MBA application cycle. It has literally 8 essays, and like 7 essays are mandatory and one is an optional essay, and people still fill up the optional essay because they still want to convey more stuff, right?
Right.
So 8 essays is atypical of a school, right? Out of that 8 essays, and it's not, these are like short essays, these are like, you remember,
Oh,
right?
really?
These
I
are like
have no memory of this now. It's too
but
long.
yeah, so these are like, you have like professional essays and you have like personal essays, right? And so these are long essays, right? And these people take a lot of time. Typically, ideally, you should spend a lot of time to draft those essays because of this entire process of thinking, rethinking. So one of these essays, and I would start with that essay, which is very related to previously what you're talking about, your multiple hiking experience and other sort of extracurriculars. So one essay talks about like, what have you done outside work in terms of extracurriculars, right? So firstly, why do the admission committee want to know this information? What they are looking for from this information? Because at the end of the day, you are going to do a job or like start a business, right? But you're not going to pursue that extracurricular, because if that was your primary goal, you would have otherwise done it, right? Why would have done it as an extracurricular? So my question, a lot of people ask this question to me: why is it important? Secondly, a lot of people also say that I have been in jobs where it's very hectic, and I mean, I would say you're one of the lucky ones, and you've like determined ones too, who've actually taken out time outside CS to work on all of these stuff, right? Because you're passionate about it. But a lot of times your stress kind of subdues your passion, because like in ZS, right? We worked there and it was a stressful job. It was fun. I would not say it was not fun. It was stressful, but in terms of long day work periods and stuff. So a lot of people do not have that bandwidth to take up an extracurricular. Um, and especially when they realize that extracurriculars are important for INSEAD, by that time they only have 6 months left. And 6 months is very difficult to do something as an extracurricular and justify that it's an extracurricular. The admission committee will figure it out, right? If you're doing this just for the sake of application. So how do people, like, both questions, just restating first question, why extracurricular is important for INSEAD, and secondly, if people do not have that bandwidth to pursue extracurriculars, what should they respond to that question?
I think extracurriculars, honestly, not just for INSEAD, but in life is very important. And I'll specifically say about INSEAD. But I had, my batchmates were people who were coming from, who had been at, for example, the Israeli Prime Minister's office. They were an assistant to the Israeli Prime Minister's office, or they were one of the founding members of Italy's largest startup at that point, or like which eventually became the Italy's largest startup at that point. Uh, like we had members who were experts in. We had a member who was an expert in wind sailing, for example, and or actually one of my roommates from my first 2 periods had been a British Army captain who who had done sailing all around the world. And so when you interact with these people, with your colleagues at that in that environment, I remember the trips that we took afterwards, where we went for a sailing trip organized by this my roommate, who took an 80 feet boat, and then he was the one who was the captain, and we just went around multiple islands just exploring them. Right? I think that experience comes from the extracurriculars. That is not because he was a captain and as part of the captain's duty this was happening. He chose to do these things. He chose to build the skill set up, and because he chose to do that, because that's who he was, when we met at INSEAD, that's the experience I got thanks to him. So the richness of my experiences at INSEAD is completely correlated to how dynamic the people within my batch are. Directly, there's a direct correlation, and then it's an exponential curve, right? So the more people who have multiple experiences, the more diverse and more rich the experience for the student body is. And that's what I truly remember, right? Those are the trips. Like the academic, by the way, there was some amazing professors. I still remember their classes and these activities that we did outside of the class. because of these people. And by the way, these are not just activities, it could be conversations, like speaking to somebody who was coming from Yemen and the situation in Yemen, right? Like how bad the situation is. Like to have the empathy to be able to understand what they're going through. All of this comes from people who have multi-dimensional personalities, right? Or are, see, you don't have to, there's no person is a complete project. So ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है कि somebody just because the army captain did sailing. By the way, I went for like I used to go once a month for making sure that the trails in the hiking next to my place were clean and were well maintained. That is once a month. I wasn't even like it's nothing compared to sailing, right? So it's not about whether you're a complete person and you have all these amazing experiences, is whether you are on that journey, on that path of experiencing multiple things for yourself or your own interests. So I think that's the reason why they look at this, because if you bring in unidimensional folks, people with just one primary experience, it'll reduce the richness of whatever the student body brings together. And I think, and now I'll come to the second question, right? I think people quite underestimate two things. One, what they have done in terms of interesting experiences, as well as their time and all of this. I think if having this mindset that, oh, my was a hectic job, that's why I couldn't do it, is just an indicator that maybe you're not thinking about this 100% correctly, because even INSEAD is not going to be fun then. INSEAD is like, especially INSEAD, maybe a Wharton or Harvard is a better place then, right? Because if you're, or an LBS, honestly, a London Business School is a much better place then.
Where, because of academic concentrations overpower it.
Yeah, so maybe that's the better place for you to consider going, because I'm not saying don't go to INSEAD. Definitely apply to INSEAD. Like it's a great school to go to. I'm just saying if that's the natural response, oh, my work was hectic, I think then you're selling yourself short to yourself first. Genuinely, that's something I would want to reconsider and revisit.
Yeah, I mean, so what I typically, when somebody asks me this question and you can tell me, I mean, how can I also improve on this in terms of art, like in terms of my idea is like, when I tell people, I tell them, like, think about everything you've done, right? Forget if it's a trivial thing or non-trivial thing. Forget about, like, even if you probably in your childhood, if you can, like for me, I used to I used to keep track of Saurav Ganguly's scores in every match. Like right. How much he has scored, because Sachin scores. My dad used to keep track of sort of scores, so we had a constant conflict that he's tracking that, I'm tracking that. So that ways, my knowledge of cricket from that period of time is extremely accurate, right? People right. Also know that India won the World Cup, but again, so my knowledge is accurate. Similarly, I ask people that to kind of push your boundaries and think of these small things. If you have not done something which is like very tangible, at least think of things which are like you've done, like, and a very, like, for example, last year I was working with somebody, and what he did was he was working in, I think, one of the big fours, and he used to, like, he went for a trip to assignment to one of the African countries, and there the notion was that African country is not safe for a lot of people. You can't go out beyond 9 o'clock, so you are in a very heavy guarded place. When this person actually went there, he kind of had fun and he had nothing of that bad experience. In fact, he had good stuff to talk about. Right. So he sent an email and he started a small forum in his office saying that, hey, this is my experience. These are all the good things. These are places to go. These are restaurants to go. These are food to eat. These are the small languages to learn. And that every time now, this person or somebody from his organization goes to a country, he writes that stuff. So if, for example, tomorrow I have to go to that African country, I'll just go and see the forum who has mentioned what. And these are all people I know, right? These are not like strangers. These are people who are sitting next to me. They have their experience. So something like this is something which we talked about in his application, that something which he did out of his passion.
This is genuinely a very positive thing, because you're engaging with a very different community. And if again, I've never sat in an admissions committee, but as somebody who participated there, this would be something that definitely would be very welcomed within the INSEAD student community, because it's something which shows that you're connecting with people outside of the people who outside of the communities that you identify with. you went out and you tried and engaging with somebody else. This is a great example of that. It might, to the person who's doing it, but doesn't seem massive.
Yeah. So when he told me that, for him, he said like, yeah, I just wrote an email and started a forum. Everybody does it. Like, people talk about TT matches also in that forum. What is the big deal about it? So then, but yeah, of course, when you started more digging deep, you find the value in that, the impact you created because of that.
And I think you're absolutely right. People sell themselves short. Honestly, that's the reality of because it's difficult for you to remember all these moments as your highs, but it's easier for somebody else to see those and point those out and take out the patterns.
Right. Fair enough. No, perfect. So now, again, another interesting question in the essays is mention what are your strengths and what is your area of improvement. While everyone is very knowledgeable about their strengths, right? People are typically knowledgeable about their strengths because they've had to sell themselves in multiple places where they'd only talk about strengths, be it a promotion or like raising funds or hiring somebody or like whatever XYZ things in your life. You have to sell yourself and you talk about the strengths. Areas of improvement, also known as weaknesses, right? Or like things which you are not appropriate right now in the current state. Those are things which people not typically don't give a lot of thought to. And that's why when people start writing this answer or this essay is typically 400 words. What ends up happening is people write about 320 words about strengths and leave only 80 words about the area of improvement. So, which personally I believe is not the right picture, because the school has asked this question for a reason. They want to see, right, both sides of you. So, why do you think the school asked this question again? And like, why the school asked, and how can people identify area of improvement?
Well, I think I honestly don't like this question personally. This is not a great question in my opinion. Like, even in job interviews, why ask somebody their weaknesses, right? But I think the school is trying to take away people who are on the journey of self-awareness, right? Versus the people who are just fibbing just because they want to be at that school. In this case, INSEAD. And I think it's a great way of differentiating the two, because all the other essays, the 7 essays that you have written, will have some patterns which, if they don't follow through in your strengths and weaknesses, it's a sort of a yellow flag to say, hey, do we even want to interview this candidate? Again, this is all extrapolation of how probably admissions committees think about it. So I think it's, for the committee, it's a great way of understanding, okay, what does this person consider their strength as? What does this person want to work at? Like, everybody has something to work on, right? And a genuine answer which fits in well with overall your story makes a much more compelling argument that you are coming to INSEAD with the mindset of working on these challenges and really taking the full experience to help you work on these challenges, but then really polish them up so that you're ready for the recruitment season. And everything is about how recruitable you are at the end of the day, and how much do you help the other peers in your batch? How do you help them improve on their strengths and weaknesses? And so I think it's more of a way of separating out people who haven't thought deeply about why they want to be there and what they want to do, with people who have thought about it. Now, of course, you can create a narrative. Creation is not extremely difficult, right? It is difficult, but it's not impossible to do. So I'm sure people write all sorts of stuff which is not true, but it makes sense to do it genuinely. It's a great process of introspection as well. And I think the better you do introspection, the more genuinely you do the introspection, the better your response becomes. And I think that resonates with the admissions committee as well.
Yeah, and I think the admission committee don't take this as a negative, right? Like, if you talked about a weakness,
yeah,
like they will not take it as a negative, right? So as long as you can also demonstrate that you've worked on that weakness,
like, I would argue that I think every strength, every super strength that you have is also a weakness. Everything is a yin and yang, so everything gets balanced out. Anything that, if you say, hey, I'm really good at problem solving, but okay, maybe you're really good at problem solving, but maybe that you're so good at problem solving sometimes that you forget whether it's the right problem or not. You're not able to get it right. So everything has a yin and yang. And I think good essays, in my opinion, and by the way, this is in retrospect now, after like 6 or 7 years post INSEAD, right? In retrospect, a really good essay will say, here are my super strengths and here are the flaws of this super strength, and maybe here's a few other things that I do well, and here's a few things that I'm working on, right? Like it's because everything has a yin and yang, and I think that kind of well thought out introspection is extremely powerful, not just for the committee but also for the candidate themselves. And uh, I think I think it's like a, what are your weaknesses is not a great way of thinking about it. I think it's things you should think about in terms of what are things that you want to do, and it's true all the time. Like today, I know the areas that I want to improve on, and I know what my strengths are, and it's because I am more honest with myself. And like people who say, "Oh, I'm too much of a perfectionist," like that's not really a weakness. Okay, like that honestly, that's a very shallow answer to a very important question. So definitely don't fall into the trap, oh, you're going to be judged. There's no judgment on the other side. It's more about understanding whether you have done any sort of introspection for why you are doing what you're doing, why are you applying here. It's not a cheap program, it's not an easy program to get into, it's not a cheap program or an easy program to recruit out of, right? By the way, every business school, it's difficult to recruit out of because you're competing with some of the smartest people in within your industry, across your industry, in your age group, across your age groups. So you are competing against some of the best people. And when you
and the firms also have to justify the ROI in giving it's you're not joining as a fresher or a trainee. You'll join at a mid management
like
position.
There were programs that recruit out of INSEAD where only the top 4 business schools in the world, only their candidates go, and only 2 candidates from each school. So there are programs like that come to business school, and they're like, hey, there's a 500 of you, we need to recruit 2, and also we're not compulsorily recruiting 2, we need to recruit 2 people maximum if we get the right people. So you're competing at that level eventually. So it's not something like when you go to these programs, you need to bring your A game, and your admissions, your application should be your A game, and that requires introspection.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that's very important to people. But what you said is, I think the biggest takeaway I'll take this from your answer or response is nobody is judging on the other side, right? So the moment you kind of get that out of your system, that nobody's judging me, even if I tell this is my weakness, then people are more open. At the moment somebody feels that no, whatever I write, I might be scrutinized based on that, they might not select me based on that, then people kind of try to divert from the originality and kind of cook up something which is non genuine.
And the better your answer is, the more genuine your answer is, the better it fits into your overall story. All this other 6 essays or the optional +1 essay, the other 7 essays that you write will all tie into have pointers that connect the overall story together. So even if you read half the application and you pick up half the application after 2 hours, you'll be able to relate the two. And that is what gets you in front of the committee head. Committee people are people, right? So they just like, in my head, it's like a bunch of people sitting together and being like, oh, I like this candidate, I want to push them through. So you want some people to over there like your story, like how genuine it is. And it will only come across, they're not judging there, they're just looking for the right people for their program.
Perfect. Okay, so now I will just do a quick transition from the personal essays to the professional essays. Professional essays, I will not talk about the ones which are straightforward, right? The goals ones are straightforward. Everybody should be aware of a goal, and we also talked about goals. We touched upon subject of goals before. One thing which I would definitely want to touch upon is a question where they say, if you were in your current role, and like if you're in a current organization, what sort of roles would you take up in the next 1 year, in the next near-term future, and what sort of responsibilities would you be doing? And so what should a person write here? So because the person is doing an MBA not to be in that current role, right? Because this is a seems like contradictory statement. That is this a question of what will you do if you not get into the MBA program? What is your option B, or why? What is the essence of this question?
I think they just want to understand what career trajectory are you on, like how ambitious are you. I went gung ho. I was like, what you're asking me in 2-3 years? I'll tell you, I'll be leading this vertical. I want to do this. This is the gap in the industry that I see, because that's that's how I wrote my essays, right? That I see certain gaps in the business world, and here's how I want to address them, and this is how I can do it through my current organization. But I don't think I have these skill sets, so this is why I want an MBA and blah blah. Like all that was part of my story. So see, INSEAD is, or any business school is a stepping stone. It cannot, it is a stepping stone.
It's not a destination.
Yeah, it's not a destination, and it's an option that you are trying to create for yourself. You're not sure whether that stepping stone exists when you are applying, though definitely you're not sure. So the committee is just looking at, okay, boss, I understand, hey, you want to come to INSEAD and you want to do great things post INSEAD, but what have you thought about in life? Like, are you ambitious? Are you thinking about the next step? Are you genuinely somebody who actively looks forward and just thinks about their life, not INSEAD as a stepping stone? I think that message is sort of important. That genuineness is important, and I know it's difficult for people to have that essence. What I would just tell people is not to worry about, hey, post INSEAD, what I will be doing, whether it's a post business school degree or not. Don't worry about that. Be aggressive. Show the committee that you are somebody who is bullish on yourself. You believe in yourself. And only that a person who believes in themselves is a base requirement for somebody else to believe in them. So the committee will only want to believe in people.
God helps those who help themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I don't have faith in myself, why will Arijit have faith in me? Like there's no reason for him to have faith in me, right? Especially when they don't know you as a person at all. They're not your parents. They're not your siblings. So you have to believe in yourself. Be bullish. By 3 साल में I'll get double promotion. Like, but obviously be somewhat realistic about it, but be bullish on yourself.
But then, Mudit, I have a question. Isn't that a double-edged kind of sword? Because if you say the question is, I mean, I'm not talking about the question of what are your goals post INSEAD, right? That's a separate question which you can be absolutely aggressive. But the question is, if you are not getting into INSEAD and you are in that your current role, what would you be doing? So if I go too aggressive on this, so won't the admission committee get a flavor that like, he's already doing so much in his career? Why does he even need to come to an INSEAD? Because he's already had his plan laid out for the next few years, which seems to be a very good trajectory, right? Or a growing trajectory, growth trajectory.
I think in isolation, you're absolutely right. That's what they would take away. But this clubbed with why are you coming to INSEAD? What are you looking to do in your life? I think that's why all the combination, it's always a narrative. All the essays are a narrative, right? And of course, like that's what you do, Arijit, right? Like you help create that narrative. So if the narrative says, oh, I can be very aggressive in this side and I can do this, but really I want to take this 10 steps forward. I want to make this global. I'm going to do this for India, right? Like for candidates from India, I'm going to be working out of India and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to build up a new vertical and I'm going to launch a new business line, whatever you want to say as part of the next 2-3 years, great. But now when you talk about the other essays, you've said, hey, I think that this potential of what I'm doing and what I want to do is way bigger globally. And I want to have a network which will allow me to access it. I want to build up these 3 skill sets to be able to do something like this. And I think this is the specific skill set that I really want to build up at INSEAD. Like I'm just giving you one example of that narrative, right? There can be multiple, there are thousands and millions of versions of this, but this together with the overall essays that you write. So, okay, let me take a step back. Your next 2-3 years should show that you have confidence in yourself. That is all I'm saying. Now, whether you are, I would go hyper aggressive because I have that much confidence, maybe, but maybe overconfidence, if you want to call it that. But that's what I bring to the table, right? That's my personality. That's what I'm bringing to the table. So as long as you show that you have faith in yourself, you show that you believe in yourself over the next 2-3 years, that you will be able to crack it wherever you are. And by the way, the committee is not asking this as an alternative to MBA. The committee is literally trying to understand what is your trajectory. Your trajectory is all they care about. Like you want to show that you were promoted once at least over the last 3-4 years. You want to show why you were promoted, what additional responsibilities you get. This is a continuation of that. Are you on that same trajectory? I'm saying be bullish on that trajectory.
So essentially, what you're saying is we have to demonstrate, the applicants have to demonstrate that they're leaving this job on a high. They're not. It's not that they were on a downward trend, and then because of that downward trend they hit a plateau in their career. That's why they don't want to do an MBA. They rather have to show that they were already on a very high trajectory in their career, and now they want to even further increase the slope. Right. So, and that's where the MBA fits in. Is that
or change the axis a little bit and go in
change the axis?
Right. So there's three things you had asked this earlier. Like there's three things that you can change, right? I'm forgetting the third one, I think, but you can change your location. This is a very INSEAD specific thing, given that you are not INSEAD specific, but more specific to schools which are more global in their incoming and outgoing batches, right? So you can either change your geography, or you can change your industry, or you can change what you do as as the specific thing that you do, right? Whatever your skill set is. There are three things you can change. It's really difficult to change all. Really difficult. तुम industry भी change करोगे, location भी change करोगे, and what specific function.
Job function also. Job function also.
It's very difficult to do. You have to focus on two.
Pick your battles. Choose your battles wisely.
Pick your battles, and these battles are great battles. You want geography, okay? Then you change industry and do. See, life is very long, right? So, anyways, that's a separate story. But the point is that for this response, you are just looking at, okay, you are on a trajectory which makes sense, and you're bullish on yourself within this. You're bullish on yourself in this trajectory. Now you want to change one of these three things, or two of these three things, maybe all of these three things if you're super aggressive. That's an okay response in the rest of the essays.
Yeah. Well, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's why. Thank you so much, Mudit, for being here and talking about all these things from an alum perspective. While I definitely know that these things are in place because there are people who have got success stories because of this logic, but hearing it from the horse's mouth, of course, gives a lot of validation to the thoughts. Right. So thank you so much for being here. We're almost there on time. We'll wrap up 5 minutes before, which is good. Like meetings getting wrapped up early is good. But any parting thoughts from you for the people, for everyone who's watching this, not only from INSEAD perspective, but for any global, like INSEAD is the most global business school in the world, but anyone who's applying to an international program. So what do you think they should be doing, especially considering as you mentioned, it's a significant investment. Investment, and in terms of cash flow, you are actually cash flow negative significantly, because also you are leaving the opportunity cost of earning money, right? So from that, like, what are the parting thoughts? What you have for people who are still thinking whether they should apply to INSEAD, and people who are one step still below in that curve, whether they should even do an MBA or not, right? So any parting thoughts on those?
Yes, see, I think there's 2-3 things that I would just want to add in. One, MBA is a stepping stone. It's not going to solve your professional problems. By the way, I knew people who were way more confused. Most people, including myself, were way more confused at the end of INSEAD than at the start. and more so because at the start of INSEAD, we were like, INSEAD is going to solve our problem. And then, we had a class, maybe I'll use up all the time for this. We had a class where they made us read letters from INSEAD alums who had been at least 10 years out of INSEAD, right? So after 10 years, they wrote the letters, and you read those letters, they wrote it to themselves, and you read those letters and they have the same insecurities, same issues that we had while at INSEAD 10 years later. So business school is not going to give you answers that you're looking for. Business school is just a stepping stone towards changing one of the axes that you want. And especially international programs, the 3 axes that you can change is location, function, or your
industry.
So think about it from that perspective, because it is a lot of commitment of time, of effort, of all of these things. So please think about this as a stepping stone, and you don't need to have exact answers. You can generally know that, okay, I want to change industries. That's why I'm going to do a business school. That's an okay answer to get into. And the second thing I would say is really focus on I would really recommend giving it 1 or 2 really good shots, right? Don't spend 5 years trying to get into the right school. There is no right school. Every school is the right school. Every school is the wrong school. It all depends on your attitude. I would say get the help, make it a 1 or 2 shot. a process where you're spending lesser time on this stepping stone. There are many stepping stones. Business school is a great stepping stone for certain things, and but don't spend multiple attempts at trying to get into the right school just for the pedigree. Does not matter after a while, honestly. And lastly, I think don't underestimate yourself going into this would be the last thing I would say. Like, all the person who has to be the most bullish on you is you, and that will make a huge difference in application to interviews to your experience at business school to recruiting to post recruitment.
Absolutely, and in fact, in your career as well, right? I'm sure if people do not have experience like confidence, you will not be able to take a lot of these uncharted territories, which you ideally want to do. It's one life, right? You should try to explore as much as possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, Mudit. It was really nice having you here. I am sure people whoever watch this today and will watch it in future as well, because it'll be archived in YouTube. So whoever who will watch this, it'll be very beneficial for them. So thank you so much, Mudit, and I would probably get back you on sometime later on when we do some similar session on starting up, or entrepreneurship, or on product management, any of these terms which are outcome, like which are like, I would not say like what you do in an MBA program, but like, of course, after the MBA program, what you do, right? So yeah.
Absolutely.
So great, and thank you, Mudit, so much for having being here, and it was really a pleasure talking with you and discussing all these things from a very, I think, candid perspective. That's what you brought to the table, candid perspective. I'm sure everyone would love it, and I'll value the application.
Yeah, and just one last thing, Arijit, if you have folks who have questions around INSEAD, happy to help them out from that.
Perfect. On that note, like I will, yes, of course, you can disconnect. I'll share the details of how do people reach out to us. I'll share that in the screen. Keep the screen on for, let's say, the next 15 seconds, and hopefully people can jot down the details and then reach out.
Cool. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Mudit. Have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye. So guys, these are the contact details. As you can see, I am one of the founders. So I am one of the founders of Crack Admission, Arijit. So you can reach out, of course, to me, and you can send us an email. We do pro bono profile evaluation because we love talking to people, listening to their stories. So we do that, and of course, we have alums like Mudit, who was there with us for the last 1 hour, who will also be happy to volunteer and help you guys. So do reach out to us if you need any sort of help, and wish you all the very best for your MBA application. It's a fun ride. It's not a overwhelming journey. Yeah, there are 8 essays, but still it's not an overwhelming journey. It's a fun ride, and do make the most of it. Okay. Cheers, guys. Have a good day.